Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Next week, got a couple exciting announcements in regards to some new sponsors that are going to be covering the show. Be part of the Passball Show family. Want to throw the number out there if you're interested. It's 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. One of the things that we are doing is we're bringing back a couple of the older intros. This is actually the original intro that we played on the Passball Show, probably for the first, 80-something or 90-something episodes of the Passball Show. So after that, we went to a different intro, which we played probably up until around Passball Show number 200. So we're going to be showing those, as well as the intro that is the biggest part of the Passball Show. And that, of course, is the one with John Pielli's name in it, the whole thing. We will discuss that. Anything that's on your mind in regards to baseball, sports, and unifying America. So we will get into some other stuff. But, if you follow the intro and the interview I did yesterday with Jerry Izenberg, who, of course, is a longtime baseball columnist. He has been in the business for the better part of the past 66, 67 years. And if you heard him talk yesterday, the guy still is got some lively energy to him, a little bit of an edge to him as well. I got to be honest, a couple points of that interview, he kind of gives you that, overpowering presence, which is part of the reason why he had the success that he's had over the better part of the almost 70 years. Jeez. I mean, for a guy that's 87 years old that is working on his 14th book, and it doesn't look like he's stopping anytime soon. I mean, I could spend an whole hour of the show breaking down the stuff that he talked about because, he is a good part of baseball history. A man that you could talk about what he remembers as a kid at 7 years old in 1937 and just all the different things that he was part of in regards to sports history, from him to being able to cover Wellington Mara and Vince Lombardi before they became Wellington Mara and Vince Lombardi. Obviously, not just his friendship for over 50 years with Muhammad Ali, but all the different aspects that he was able to cover in the history of boxing. And remember, boxing, we don't talk about boxing as much on the mainstream right now in regards to sports because the sport is pretty much dead. Professional boxing, the heavyweight division that was as prominent as ever in the 1950s through probably the better part of the 1980s through Mike Tyson. We watched maybe in the early part of the 90s it to have a little bit of a buzz to it. The Holyfield Tyson fights were still a big deal. The Lennox Lewis was probably the best or the last great heavyweight champion that we had in the sport of boxing. That sport is dead. The sport allowed, with its own corruption and the disgustingness to it, the negative nature of a guy like Don King and a Bob Arum, and what really the greed that got to all these guys, including the boxers, allowed for UFC to become what it is today. And you can make a case that UFC is kind of on its way down. It may not have the absolute dominance that it did when it first came out. But listen, everybody in the UFC, all the big-time, competitors and champions that exist in the sport of ultimate fighting can thank the corruption that existed in the sport of boxing, especially in that heavyweight division, that allowed that sport to crumble and deteriorate to a point where, you picked up a lot of those fans. A lot of people that were hardcore boxing fans follow the UFC religiously now and have probably given up on the sport of boxing. So Jerry Izenberg, as well as Howard Cosell, and I'll continue to mention Howard Cosell on this broadcast because he was the pioneer in regards to sports broadcasting as it exists today. Now, you may want to say technology would grow to a point where I could do something like I'm doing right now and that's, being live on Periscope and Facebook and on demand on YouTube. I could do that without a Howard Cosell. But what would my format be? The fact that, I'm able to reach out to people and do certain interviews over the air didn't exist before Howard Cosell made it work. And he made it work by having the balls to go out there with, 30 pounds of equipment and find a way to record something that really wasn't done. It could have existed. The technology was there for it to happen, but nobody tried to do it in the format that he did it. Put a recorder, get somebody's voice, you and them back and forth, and save it. Obviously, save it on those, those crazy films that you got with all the tape that you had to roll up, 1,000 times. Somebody, unplugs the plug from the wall, and all of a sudden you lose everything. Because obviously, we've grown a long way in the world of technology, but without Howard Cosell, having enough within himself to want to try this and believe that it could work. The means that we have in regards to communication may not be the way it is, especially in the world of sports broadcasting. But, Jerry Izenberg, from what he did in the world of boxing, and he would say that that's probably the most passion he had covering the sport, but a guy who was able to tell stories. And with him, you could take the 13 books, and hopefully he gets to write the 17 or 18 books that he wants to write in his lifetime. You could pretty much retell a better part of the 20th century's history of sports. And a couple of points that he made now were pretty good in regards to now. When you're asking people about the information that they want to know, they're so obsessed with the use of stats and information and numbers. They don't want to really spend the time to talk about the things that existed in its history. The things that existed before they were born, in some cases, allowed for the opportunities that they have to even follow sports. But we tend to want to forget about all that. I may bore some people when I talk about baseball in the 1920s or, the 19th century for that matter. But a sport like baseball has succeeded through a lot of adversities and a lot of changes. And you know what? If it wasn't for those changes, we wouldn't have the sport that we have that a lot of people enjoy. Same applies to football. We could talk about professional football as it existed in the 1920s and 30s. You could talk about games that were being played that were just as violent in regards to football. And people were risking their lives by playing as hard as they did with the recklessness and abandon that they played with. In front of crowds where nobody was watching. Television didn't exist. Radio was in its infancy. And nobody was at the stadium. So professional football, as it's grown into the juggernaut that it is, where ratings are out of this world, even though they've been down over the last couple of years. We could talk about the reasons that happened. You could blame more on the protest and Colin Kaepernick if you want, but I tend to think there's a lot more to that. And there's a lot more in regards to ratings that we try to generate from sports, whether it's baseball, football, basketball, and hockey. We're factoring in numbers, and unfortunately there's so many different variables that exist that are different from following sports 10 years ago, following sports 20 years ago. When we're talking about ratings being down in the NFL, are we factoring in how many people are following the scores through their mobile apps? Are we talking about how many people have whatever website they use for fantasy football, that while they're following how their favorite players are tracking and the amount of points that they're getting for their respective teams, they're also following the scores? Is this all being factored in? In other words, are we seeing let's say a little more of a diversification of where people are going to follow the same sport that they were following the same about 10 years ago, but just they're not getting credit for it because they're following through, online or through their mobile devices? Sure, stadiums aren't filled with fans like they were. If you look at baseball in the 1940s, people, that was one of the only ways people looked to view a game was to be there in person. They could listen on a radio, and sure, as time went on, the radio listenership kind of saturated some of that existed in regards to people going to the stadiums. You didn't have to be at the stadium to follow the game. But are we factoring in all the different variables that are out there and means for the consumer, which is the fans, the people that are following the game, they can follow in a bunch of different ways. But I tell you, I look at it and I tell you, I got a point here from the Grand Old Game. It says people want more. Next step after UFC, the fans are going to want to see someone die in the octagon. And I tell you, that isn't a bad point. If people want to see, think about it, professional wrestling as we look at it in regards to the, we know that it's fake, but people follow it because of the soap opera that exists with it. You watch professional boxing, it's a lot more violent. These people are they're trying to hurt each other. UFC, listen, they're trying to submit the person to a point saying, hey, I'm going to essentially try to kill you until you say you don't want to try, you don't want to fight anymore. So, when we look at, let's say, going back in MTV in the 1990s when they had the celebrity death match, and we obviously knew that, it wasn't really people dying, but it was people dying essentially in effigy, right? You have, one celebrity against another celebrity. It's not really them fighting, but in the end, somebody does die. So the stance that's made in regards to a death, whether it's a signification of a death or an actual death, was still somebody dying. But, fans want to see that. They want to see the gore. It's like that car accident that you're following on the parkway as you're driving, wherever it is that you're going. And, you see the smoke, you see the flames, you see the ambulances there, you hear people screaming. And normally, you'd want to not look at it because it's gorifying. It's disgusting. It's something that you would not like to see. But for whatever reason, your eyes are drawn to it. Your eyes are drawn to it because of the, everything that it stands for that's wrong. For every reason that you wouldn't want to look at it, you want to see it. And I think the same does, apply in regards to sports where we're encouraging violence. The National Football League tries to go out there and say that they're doing everything they can to avoid, serious injuries. You got players that, right after they're done playing, they can't deal with the headaches anymore. So they take a gun and they blow their brains out. They can't deal with the impacts of the serious head injuries that exist. But the National Football League would never want to do anything that's going to impact their ratings. And there are people, there are fans, there are diehard sports fans that enjoy the violence that exists in sports. There's people that follow hockey because they like to see, number one, the fighting. They like to see the intense physical play. The blood that's shed from here and there. They're okay with that. So there are fans that, whether you want to say that you're a fan like that, say that you want to see gore and violence, and that's the reason that you watch sports, that may not be you. But there's a certain amount of people that exist that want to see this absolute violence when you're talking about people going after, seriously trying to hurt each other. So how it went from boxing had it. They had the ultimate game. And like Jerry Izenberg said when he was on the show yesterday, the fact that there was 3 people there that could impact the fight. It was the 2 fighters and a referee. Nothing else. Mano a mano. One guy's physical strength against the other guy's physical strength. You throw agility there, you throw some speed and quickness, a little bit of power, and the best fighter made a best fighter win. But boxing, who was right up there on a pedestal, probably considered for a good 30 to 40 years the best, physical violence sport that existed in this country, was destroyed by greed and corruption. And a guy like Don King, who, if he's going to do an interview with you, all he's going to do is just talk. He's just never going to shut the hell up. He's going to say things just for the sake of saying them, and he's going to talk over you the whole time. The guy's a criminal. The guy destroyed the sport of boxing. So the fact that very few people, or unless the diehard of the diehards that just love to see a good fight, have either have either gone to a different sport, whether it's UFC, whether it's any other means of finding something that involved some sort of violence, or just stayed away from boxing altogether and said, hey, maybe let me watch a little tennis. Let me watch a little golf if you want to talk about individual competition. Or maybe get a little more involved in watching and following a team sport. But the sport of professional boxing, I'm telling you, is dead. You could develop the greatest series of fighters, whether it's through the Golden Gloves or through the Olympics. We could have the next series of Ali and Liston and Joe Frazier and Ali and Tyson and Lennox Lewis. And they will still not get anywhere near the amount of attention that these other fighters got during the glory days of boxing. So I don't know if it's a matter of talking about a class action lawsuit where the fighters of today can try to get something back from a corrupt individual like a Don King or others in his ilk. But it's a sport, and I'm telling you, you're talking about Ultimate Fighters. They're going to full 9 now. It's not just about being able to punch and dodge a punch, have power, have a little bit of agility. It's about being that ultimate fighter. Being able to use your legs, being able to think a little bit with your mind in regards to what the next person's going to do. Realize they might not be looking to punch you. They might be looking to set you up. They might roundhouse your ass. But the bottom line is you got a sport in boxing which was, up to a certain point, controlled. And I agree with that. You look at fighters as they came up through the 60s and 70s, may not have necessarily gotten everything that they deserved. And you had promoters, pretty similar. And I don't want to jump all over the place, but when you talk about Major League Baseball and the reserve clause, and you have players for so many years being controlled by the owners, and having only one option to sign a 1-year contract with an option for whatever the owners want to pay you. We knew that was wrong. We knew it wasn't fair to the players. So Marvin Miller jumps in. Guys like Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally stand up and decide that they're going to go a full year without earning a Major League Baseball player's salary to essentially play out their option years and become a free agent. The Peter Seitz decision. Prior to that, you had Catfish Hunter, who finds the payment that owner Charles Finley didn't send him when he should have on time. And he gets out of his contract and becomes a free agent. So you got, obviously, the pendulum swinging the other way. And all of a sudden, free agency is running rampant. Players are getting whatever it is that they want. You could say it's bad for the owners, but the owners are still the ones paying them. As it applies to boxing, fighters are starting to get compensated. Maybe they weren't getting compensated at the rate or the levels that they were expecting to. A guy like Don King comes in and says, hey, I'm going to get you more money. And all of a sudden, you have heavyweight champions that are like, hey, I want to continue to gain this payday. I want to get paid for as many more of these fights as possible, but I also want to last a couple more fights. So I'm not going to fight the best of the best. And you saw that happen with Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes was going for the ultimate, record of most victories to start their career without losing. Rocky Marciano held it with 49. Larry Holmes got up to 48 until he fought and lost to Michael Spinks. But it was set up for him. And there was a part of it that wasn't legitimate because he was taking fights against bums that didn't belong in the same ring as him. And I don't blame Larry Holmes for that. I blame Don King. I blame the corruption of boxing, which is essentially setting this guy up to put up this fake show when it's supposed to be a violent game. What are the fans tuning into? They're not tuning in to see if Larry Holmes can continue to be undefeated. They want to see if that next person that he's going up against has a chance against him. They want to see him go up against the best of the best. And Larry Holmes, up to a certain point, took the big fights, and then once he became the champion and remained undefeated, he stopped taking the big fights. He would fight a little more often, but he knew his competition was garbage. He was going up against bums. He was going up against guys that were looking for a payday for themselves, but essentially knew that they had no chance fighting against Larry Holmes in his prime. So you have the corruption that exists in boxing, and it basically disintegrates the sport. And I hope Don King is happy of his contribution to boxing. And if anybody in boxing wants to look at Don King as one of the greats, or anybody that deserves any sort of recognition for anything he did for the sport, he friggin' ruined the damn thing. And I tell you, I was one of the fans that loved boxing in the 80s, loved boxing in the 90s. Unfortunately, I couldn't go back any further in the 80s, but I embraced this history. You know, Jack Johnson and Jersey Joe Walcott, Rocky Marciano, Sonny Liston, Ali, Frazier, George Foreman, Ken Norton. You know, to be the champion, the one that everybody wants to go up there and get a piece of. You looked at the 60s and the 70s and the amount of guys that were on the same level. You know, you're looking at a Frazier and Foreman fight, or Frazier and Ali fight, and you really didn't know who was going to win because you knew it was two great fighters fighting each other in their prime. And when it became all about the money, when the paydays became a little bit too much, the champions started to take a step back. And it wasn't that important for them to fight the best of the best anymore, because they were getting paid. They were getting compensated. And they knew that every single one of their fights, no matter who it was up against, they were going to get paid. So why not it be against a bum? Why not it be against somebody that didn't belong in the same ring as them? Once again, John Pielli with you, Pass Ball Show. Number, if you're interested, 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. I'll talk a little baseball right now. Obviously, we're right in the beginning of spring training. And I do want to emphasize that because, you know, we wait as baseball fans for the sport to come. We wait through the entire football season and that little bit of dead time after the Super Bowl that exists. Where, yes, hockey has its chance. You know, basketball has its chance. We get into March, of course, with March Madness coming up, which will cover the NCAA tournament. We'll have some guests on talking about it on the Pass Ball Show. But, you know, you get to a point where you're craving it. You're a baseball fan. You can't wait to see, you know, live baseball games, whether they count or not. Whatever your favorite team is, you can't wait to, if you're the Yankees, to see Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. The Mets, to see Cespedes and Syndergaard. You know, the Phillies, to see Carlos Santana for the first time. You know, Rhys Hopkins, who hit all those home runs at the end of last year. You wonder what he could do over the course of a full season. So you're craving it. Because you're craving it, you're going to tend to micromanage and overanalyze every little thing that you see in spring training. A couple things right off the bat bother me. I'll tell you. You know, you look at the Yankees today, who are playing just a regular spring training game. A spring training game which, you know, by the way, that the regulars are going to come out after their first or second at-bat, and they're going to be replaced by somebody. So when it's time to take that hitter or position player out, they're going to be replaced with whoever's going to come in the game next. Or, in some cases, somebody that's just going to come up there and get one at-bat. I'll tell you this. Anybody that's out there making a big deal because Russell Wilson came up as a pinch hitter for Aaron Judge is either just trying to be funny, or honestly, if they seriously are making a big deal about it, you know, their baseball IQ is down to a level where, you know, it shouldn't even be registered. Russell Wilson is in spring training with the Yankees. He's spent the last handful of major league, spring trainings playing with some team. He was drafted. You know, he's been bounced around to a couple different organizations. And you know what? He's probably enjoying the chance to play some professional baseball. Is he looking to get to the major leagues? Probably not. His more lucrative career exists in the National Football League, where number one, he's getting paid pretty well. And number two, he's proven he can hang up there with anybody in regards to the quarterback position. So anybody that makes a big deal that Russell Wilson pinch hit for Aaron Judge, it could have been anybody that could have come up to pinch hit for Aaron Judge. The bottom line was Aaron Judge was coming out of the game. It was time for him to, go do his regular workouts after playing a couple innings in the beginning of a spring training game. It's not like it's 2 days before the season starts. It's not like it's, August 20th. And we're talking about the bases loaded, nobody out in the 7th inning. And Aaron Boone makes this strategical decision that he's going to bring up somebody to pinch hit for Aaron Judge. One thing can't have anything to do with the other. Spring training. First of all, the games don't count. Second of all, nobody cares who wins. It's all about getting work in.